Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Weekly for Saturday, December 14th, 2019. Well, last week I sat down with Groom Law Group's principal, Kevin Walsh, to discuss the recent Supreme Court oral arguments about the Intel case. Let's take a look.
The case that has kind of the ERISA literatis world's attention, to the extent there is an ERISA literati, it's Intel versus Amaya, and it's a case that's before the Supreme Court now. And the fact pattern is that Intel has had a retirement plan for a while, a 401k plan, and that 401k plan had default investment options, and those default investment options included some alternative investments like hedge funds and private equity funds. And what the plaintiffs are alleging essentially is that they didn't realize that the funds they were in had alternative investments in them, and that those investments had higher fees than kind of a passive fund would have had, which is unsurprising because one of the things you're paying for with an alternative is management, and management costs money, and that those funds underperformed. So they're saying there was a breach of fiduciary responsibility. It was imprudent for the plan to have included these things. So essentially, we want to be made whole. So we want to be in the position we would have been if we had invested in something else that we'd understood better. And what's really interesting right now, we're not interesting, and I probably say too many things are interesting, at least according to my colleagues. But what I find
fascinating.
Thank you for coming up with a different word. With this case is that right now what they're arguing over isn't whether it was prudent to have these investment options. They're not arguing about whether or not hedge funds or private equity are good investments inside of a plan. They're not arguing about what ERISA's prudence requires. What they're arguing about is how long they have to bring their lawsuit. So under ERISA, it has this provision that says that if you're a plaintiff, if you're looking to sue your plan, and you have actual knowledge of what you're alleging, you only have 3 years.
Okay.
If you don't have actual knowledge, you've got 6 years from the breach. And what's going on now is Intel is arguing that, we sent these people their notices. We disclosed this repeatedly. If they didn't read the forms, they should have constructive knowledge. So they should be deemed to have knowledge. Or if they don't have knowledge, despite us meeting all of our disclosure requirements, the participant should be considered to have been willfully blind. So really, if you don't read your disclosures, that shouldn't get you an extra 3 years. Now, the plaintiffs are arguing, well, ERISA, unlike other statutes, says actual knowledge. And actual knowledge doesn't mean I've got an envelope on my floor that says something. It means not only have I read it, but I also understand it. And so oral arguments were at the court on Wednesday. And what was really interesting was that there was kind of a textual thread throughout this, which was, the justices were kind of concerned that if they interpret actual knowledge to mean something other than having read it and understood it, that, this could have an impact on other laws. So there's a lot of criminal laws that require actual knowledge. So I was kind of surprised by that line of argument. Also kind of humorous was that Justices Ginsburg and Gorsuch both said that they don't read their ERISA disclosures, which working with plan sponsors is kind of frustrating because if they're going to spend all the money and take all the time to get these disclosures to folks, I think there's a hope that they read them. But so there's some sense that, the plaintiffs might win this. The court could have told that you need to have actual knowledge, which on the one hand would mean that in general, if a plaintiff says they're going to get 6 years instead of 3, which could be kind of a big expansion of statute of limitations. On the other hand, if the court has to look at each plaintiff and say, you want to join this class, did you read your notice? Did you read your notice? Did you read your notice? Actual knowledge could become something where class certification could become a little bit tougher, or it could be a factual dispute that you might need to go further into through the litigation process before a class can be certified, and perhaps that could be a good thing for defendants. Really, the arguments were exciting yesterday. The justices, I think they recognize that whichever way they decide this case, there's going to be consequences, and it's going to have an impact on kind of disclosures, statute of limitations, and class certification. I mean, one thing that worries me is that what this could lead to is it could lead plan sponsors and plan fiduciaries to try to put in products that are easier to understand in their plans, rather than kind of products that might be more complicated, but that could generate better retirement outcomes. In a post-Pension Protection Act world where we have a lot of people defaulted into target date funds, right now there's been a big movement to modernize target date funds, and they could either end up in an annuity or they could include alternatives in them. But one thing with these kind of set them and forget them products is that if we're going to design them to better get the average participant who's not paying any attention to a good outcome, the products themselves tend to get more complicated. So if the Supreme Court comes out and says that there's a longer statute of limitations period if you include products that are more complicated, even if they're better products, that might be a force that kind of weighs against this trend.
This week, Devin Banerjee and I sat down to discuss the exploding child care costs. How will parents manage this financial issue? Let's take a look.
So among all of the things that Americans are dealing with in terms of costs and spending and their budgets overall, the exploding cost of childcare is starting to really come to the fore. So in the US over the past 4 decades, the cost of childcare has risen about 2,000%.
Wow.
So this is unlike any other spending. When we look at Census Bureau figures, this is a period when middle-class wages have stagnated, and even then, childcare costs have grown twice as fast as overall inflation. In some parts of the country, in California, for example, the cost of typical daycare center is about half the median income of a single parent. So this has become quite a serious issue. So what's behind it? Women's greater entry into the workforce has really pushed childcare into the realm of kind of paid labor and a service that people have to pay for. There are other reasons as well. It's a very hands-on business. There is a cost of labor involved, which means it can't be outsourced or automated like other services these days in today's economy. The industry is heavily regulated, so costs are higher for operators. Those costs are typically passed on, obviously, to consumers. And actually, what's been happening in the past decade is the real estate for childcare centers and the places where this occurs is gone through the roof. And that cost, again, is passed on to consumers. So, as I said, we saw a really interesting conversation unfold on the platform. Some people are saying this is basically like buying a new car every year in their household or having a second mortgage. It's that type of cost. We had a military spouse, Courtney Ross, talked about how it's this issue is even more acute with military families where is not as much support as some private employers that are trying to step in and help here. Elon Cavill, one of our members, said right now she's paying about $24,000 a year for her daughters.
Wow.
Almost as much as a mortgage, she says. So and so there's this debate going on now. What role does government play? What role do private employers play? And if I take some consensus from the conversation, it's that both have a very important role, and that to have productive workers who happen to be parents, companies need to do more, and to have a productive society in the future, governments need to do more. I mean, this is literally investing in the future of the productive workforce of this country, is investing in children's care. So, as I said, really powerful conversation that unfolded. And there are these competing factors, such as I mentioned, one of the reasons this has become so acute is that women, by and large, generally, are entering the workforce at higher rates than in the previous generation, when maybe they were the ones doing the childcare at home. So yes, that's driving these costs up, but it's also great for women economically to be going to work. It's great for families. It's totally changing so many other factors in the workforce in a positive way. So things are really evolving with this generation specifically. And as you alluded to, flexibility from employers as a benefit and as an element of their culture is really one of the top ways this conversation is unfolding today. And as I said, employers realize that to have happy, productive employees who happen to be parents, there is a role for them as companies to play. And there are ways to mitigate the cost of childcare. Anecdotally, I see colleagues, not doing 5 days a week of childcare because the company allows flexibility, so they can just do 2 or 3 days a week of childcare and then be home, the rest of the time. So there are so many different ways to mitigate it. I think one of the most important takeaways, which I kind of hinted at earlier, is that we saw a lot of health professionals and psychologists come out and say this is when a child is 0 to 5 years old, that's really the most impressionable time cognitively for this developing person and future adult. And so it's kind of funny that we have education paid for in most cases, in almost all cases, starting at age 5, but we're not spending time on that 0 to 5 time frame for children. So, as I said, very important topic for many reasons.
And when we come back, the digital age has changed how families interact. Stay tuned right here on BRN Weekly. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. Well, this is certainly the digital age, and all of us carry phones, devices. We're trading emails, texts, and so much more. But what's the impact to our families? This week, I sat down with the Motley Fool's Daniel Klein to discuss this and more. Let's take a look.
So the idea is that kids have their heads in their phones, their iPads, whatever it is, and because of that, they're not interacting with older generations. And I absolutely, as a parent, think about that. But this is not particularly hard to counteract. If my mother visits, which I live in Florida and she lives in Salem, Massachusetts, and we're at dinner with my son, I make my son put his phone away and talk to his grandmother. When she comes in the house the first time, I make him interact for a while, and frankly, he wants to. So this isn't a technology question, it's a parenting question. And it is easy as a parent, and I'm guilty of this sometimes. That screen can be a babysitter. My son and I were on a 5-day cruise recently. 2 of those were sea days. Many of the activities were not necessarily for teenagers. So watching YouTube videos on his phone or playing with his Nintendo Switch, those kept me from having to entertain him, and that was fabulous. But had my mother been there, or my father, they might have gone and done things, and he would have spent less of his time with the screen. So as a parent, this is something you have to be vigilant about. Not just how much time your kid's face is pressed in a screen, but as someone who works in a computer all day and deals with information and this constant barrage of Slack and email and text messages, sometimes it's important for me to put my phone down as well. I'm one of those people, holding my phone, walking through the parking lot, dangerous behavior, you shouldn't be doing that. But the phone, especially for someone who works remotely, creates the impression that you're always available.
Yeah.
So even though my coworkers do not always expect an immediate response, if I'm doing something that isn't work, I feel somewhat obligated to pick up the phone. I mean, during our last time we taped the podcast, I saw a message on Slack from my boss on something we'd been working on all morning. And I was tempted to answer it while we were doing a podcast. I didn't, because you would have heard me typing, but it's still, there is a pressure there. And some of that is about talking and communicating. With my son, I've communicated that if I text him and he's not in school, I expect an answer. And if he's, out, he games, he plays competitive card games. I understand that there might be a half-hour period where he's in a game and he can't use his phone. But if it goes much longer than that, I'm going to show up and he's not going to like that. So I think there needs to be expectations. I will use notifications in some of my apps to tell people, for example, when we're done with this, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I'm at the gym with my trainer. And while my phone will be there, my phone is there for a phone call emergency, not because I'm going to check my text messages or my Slack. So I will put a notification saying, I'm at the gym for an hour. And I think there's more of that we can do. As a boss, you have to really think about it and think about, am I creating pressure on people during hours they're not supposed to work? Now, if somebody is a full-time remote worker like I am, I'm a contractor, I'm not a salaried employee. So technically, my company can't set hours. But if I'm working with a colleague on something, we might make a time, hey, from 12 to 3, we're going to work on this, so be available. That's reasonable. If my boss, who would never do this, was just expected me to answer text messages at 2 in the morning, that wouldn't be reasonable. The reality is, for me, most of my pressure is self-driven. If I don't answer it quickly, I won't remember it's there. And that's part of the reason I travel. I do a lot of 3-day weekend cruises or other trips where I will put my phone down for 8-10 hours at a time and go to the beach or go to a theme park or do something entirely different because it's a Friday afternoon through the weekend. Now, if I'm at Disney World and it's a Tuesday, I'm not going to expect my boss to not ask me an important question and expect an answer within 45 minutes, an hour. And I think that's reasonable. We all know what the workday is. It's roughly 9 to 5. So if that's the hours your company is open, then you probably have to think about whether you can check your messages and be available or communicate that otherwise. I know I used to work with a team from Microsoft that was West Coast based, and it was super stressful because my day started at 7 a.m. Because I was stock market driven, and it didn't end until 10 o'clock at night when my bosses, fully clicked off on the West Coast. So we have to think about the expectations we set for ourselves and what our companies are setting for us. If I've set the expectation that I'm not going to be available, for example, the last trip I went on with my son, the 5-day cruise we went on, was Thanksgiving week. And I told my boss we're on a new project right at launch, so it's sort of which I didn't know when I booked the trip, but it's sort of a weird time to not be available. So I said to my boss, hey, I'm on vacation. I'll check my phone a couple times a day. I'll get you whatever answers you need. And that was enough. So if there was a piece of information in my head that was slowing up the process, I could get that to him. But that was maybe 10 minutes of engagement in a 8-9 hour workday. And frankly, that wouldn't have been necessary if we were already a mature product that had been operating and we weren't a small team. So you have to make your exceptions and you have to decide sort of what's a vacation. And for me, a vacation is I'm not alone. I'm going away with someone in the family or a friend. I'm going to be gone for more than one day. And that's a vacation. If I'm taking a random day off to go to Disney World because I want to ride the new Star Wars ride, which I am desperately going to try to do next week, that's not so much a vacation as it is me doing something a little different that my lifestyle lets me do, and it's okay if you need to ping me on email.
And in our last segment, we look back on our interview with the Core Behavioral Group's Chief Clinical Officer, Kim Potter, in our discussion about organizations hiring neurodiverse workers. It's a real feel-good story. Let's take a look.
As we're working with more people with different disabilities and different differences, I don't even want to say some of these are disabilities, they're neuro differences. So a lot of software companies, a lot of different management companies have started to see that a lot of people, not everyone is unique, but that there's a tendency for people with, say, autism to be somewhat detail oriented, or that if you're stuck on a puzzle, they may see that one thing that you cannot figure out, and that they want these people to help them with these unique problems. So Google, Apple, Oracle have all been actively, Amazon now, have been actively seeking people on the autism spectrum. More and more organizations are finding new and creative ways. There is a coffee chain called Biddy and Bose. When I was in Savannah recently, I got a wonderful cup of coffee there. The entire staff are people with developmental differences. And just as someone who has worked with both, I guess, marketing and PS and like point of sale systems, and with people with differences, it can come together, and the adaptations are already so inherent in so much of this technology. Look at a standard point of sale system these days. A lot of times, especially if you go into a coffee shop or a little boutique, it's on an iPad. You're matching the photos, you're swiping the card. And so the baseline is getting so much easier, so we can work on just developing this person even better as a whole, making them their best self. We don't want to make them any different. We don't want to make anyone not autistic. We just want to make them not struggle and be the best that they can be. And an added benefit is if it's a company like Google or Facebook that has a lot of perks already there, it's only going to help them be more independent. I don't know if Facebook has made the same offer. I know Google has, but they're very similar in that, like, you can take food home with you to eat that night. They have drop-off dry cleaning. They do it, drop-off wash and fold. So some of those skills and those executive functioning skills that people may struggle with, they take care of that for any of their employees. So it's an added benefit that may not see in a couple other places.
And that wraps up BRN Weekly for Saturday, December 14th, 2019. And don't forget, we're back again tomorrow, Sunday, for our weekly podcast, BRN Sunday, where members of the media, academia, and financial services analyze the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. And then we're back Monday morning once again for BRN AM. So until tomorrow or Monday, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.